Hey, welcome to today's video. Today we're taking a look at another DMCA topic, specifically the DMCA versus Article 13. So I'm Rick Chapo. I'm with DMCAagentservice.com. We provide third-party agents to website and app owners who are trying to comply with the DMCA by registering an agent but don't want to list their personal information. So, what are we talking about with the DMCA versus Article 13? Well, the DMCA refers to federal law in the United States, and Article 13 refers to a proposed copyright directive in the European Union, and they are in conflict. That's probably the easiest way to put it. So we'll take a look at both, but first let's talk about a concept that you need to understand because it's becoming a major issue online, and that is the splinter net. So the concept of the splinter net is that we're going to be looking at a scenario where the World Wide Web isn't so worldwide. If we go back to 1999 or so, we were in the kumbaya stage of the internet, where many people and procrastinators thought that the internet would be this utopia where governments, there would be no borders, there would be nothing of that sort. We would all join hands digitally, and ride unicorns under rainbows across fields of sugarcane. And unfortunately, that didn't quite happen. Well, it did for a while. We saw things like the Arab Spring, which were really monumentous uses of the internet. However, we are currently going through the Empire Strikes Back stage of the internet, in which governments, evil and less evil, are trying to mark their space online, and this is causing problems. Why is the splinter net a problem? Well, simply put, when these entities go ahead and pass laws and regulations and rules and what have you, they often conflict with each other. And when they conflict, that forces businesses and individuals to try to figure out, where they can act safely and where they can't. And so let's look at an example for a small online business. Well, let's say you want to do business worldwide. You want to serve customers everywhere. Okay, well, if the rules in the EU are in conflict and different from the rules in the US, and those two sets of rules are in conflict and different from the rules of China, and all three of those rules are in conflict with Russia or Brazil, or you can see where this is going. We're running into a situation where a lot of companies just don't have the resources to comply with it everywhere, and so you see traffic being blocked from certain regions. If you are in the European Union now and you try to pull up the Los Angeles Times website, at least as of the date I'm recording this, you get a page that says, "I'm sorry, we do not provide information to your area." And that's because of an EU law, or actually a regulation called the General Data Protection Regulation. And so the splinter net is a big concern. Now, of course, at this point, if you're an individual, you may be saying, good, screw the big companies, what do we care? Well, keep in mind, the big companies are where you communicate. Twitter is a private company. Facebook is a private company. Google, pick your poison, YouTube, what have you. And so if these companies start to limit where they're going to participate, that becomes an issue. And the internet, as we know it, this worldwide phenomenon, becomes a parceled out, localized platform. And who knows, maybe some people think that's for the better. But whatever your thoughts on that, it's definitely happening. And in this case, with the DMCA versus Article 13, we have a classic example of it. So the DMCA, federal law in the United States, enacted in 1998, signed into law by President Clinton, and it deals with a variety of copyright issues, but particularly Section 512C is of the great interest here. And what it says is a website, it says an internet service provider, and that can include a website or an internet-connected app, cannot be held liable for content uploaded by users under a theory of copyright infringement. So what does that mumbo jumbo mean? It means that if I go out and I take a photo, I see a celebrity photo of, I don't know who's a celebrity, it doesn't make me ill. Let's go with one that does make me ill, Kim Kardashian. Okay, and I take that photo and I copy it to my Facebook page. Okay, well, I've probably committed copyright infringement because, and I know you'll be shocked, most of those random photos of Kim Kardashian are actually taken by professional photographers that she's retained. And so that photographer is going to want to sue me for using their photo without consent. Now, can I be held liable for that under copyright infringement claims? Yes. I can try to mount some defenses, but prima facie case is yes, I can be. Can Facebook? And the answer is no. because the DMCA, again, in Section 512C, they're providing what's called a safe harbor immunity. They have immunity from those claims. And you might wonder why. Well, remember, the law was enacted in 1998. At that time, I think Google was still called Backrub. A lot of people were still accessing the internet through dial-up modems. We were in the infancy. The internet was essentially a baby as far as a commercial medium went. And as hard as it is to believe, Washington, D.C. got its act together and tried to pass a number of different laws that supported the growth of the internet. And so we see a bunch of these different laws, of which the DMCA is one. And so 20 years later, we still have this immunity. And so it doesn't matter how big or small your company is, you can take advantage of it. Now let's contrast this with Europe. So Europe has similar provisions. Service providers cannot be held liable for copyright infringement. It was a little more complex than that, but that was the general idea. Basically the same idea as the US. But in the last 4 or 5 years in the EU, we've seen an effort to essentially update their internet laws, if you will. Update's kind of a dangerous word. Update implies improvement, which I don't think we've actually seen. But that's subject for another story or another video. So Article 13 is part of an effort to update the copyright regulations there. Now, in the EU, it's important to understand that the EU doesn't issue laws. Instead, they issue regulations and directives. So a regulation is immediately binding on all the 28 members of the EU, which, obviously there'll be 27 once the UK leaves. And the directive is more of, here's an idealized goal, and each country is then supposed to pass a law that tries to meet that goal. So in this case, we're talking about the European Union Directive on Copyright in the Digital Single Market. That's tough for me to say, so let me try it again. The European Union Directive on Copyright in the Digital Single Market. And so it's this effort to harmonize copyright laws. However, it contains 2 provisions that are causing quite a bit of, controversy, I guess is the best way to put it. One would be Article 11, which deals with the link tax thing. It has to do with news. It's not really the purpose of this video. But Article 13 is essentially a provision that says for some of the bigger companies that we see out there who, shockingly, happen to be U.S. companies, we are going to get rid of the safe harbor provision. And so the first draft basically said that any internet service provider who moves, quote unquote, large amounts of data, whatever that means, would essentially, and when you read into the language, it's implied, need to filter that data and filter out any infringing content. And any infringing content that got through the filter and was published on that service provider's platform, that service provider could be held liable for. So we're essentially talking the exact opposite of the DMCA. Now, you will often read online that this directive has passed and is in force, and that's not true. People that are writing that, particularly journalists who should know better, they're idiots. That's the only thing I can say. As of January, it has not been enacted. To become a directive or a regulation in the EU, a particular piece of drafted work has to go through a number of different votes. And while this directive has passed a couple of votes, it isn't all the way through. And in fact, if you had to lay a bet right now, I would bet that it does not become a binding directive in the EU. There are a lot of problems with it, and people are starting to realize that, hey, maybe this isn't a great idea. So what's the problem with the filter idea? Well, quite frankly, filters don't work. First of all, let's start with Facebook. 2.2 billion accounts. Now, whether you love Facebook or you hate Facebook, that's a lot of content that's being moved every day. How could you possibly filter all of that and do it in an accurate manner? And the answer is you can't. And we see this, quite frankly, with YouTube. YouTube has created the Content ID system, which contains a filter as part of its deal with various entertainment groups, and it tries to filter out obviously infringing content. And anybody who uses YouTube knows it's not a great system. And that's not to bag on YouTube. It's just very difficult to identify and filter content because it can be everything from a song to something embedded in an image. There's just a variety of different ways to have an infringement arise, and nobody has been able to build a filter that can possibly deal with that. And the rumors are that Google spent something like $80 million trying to get this damn thing to work, and it just, it doesn't. I mean, it works a majority of the time, but there's still a lot of content that gets through that is blatantly infringing. For a long time, there was a Dora the Explorer video up. Dora the Explorer is a TV show for young kids, and it had 35 million views. and it was a full episode of the show. Okay, well, that's copyright infringement. There was no review of the show or anything. I couldn't think of any fair use for it, and it just sat there, and it was a full episode. And you can go find full episodes on YouTube all the time. And so, there were serious questions about, well, what happened here? Where was the filter? And so, you run into those issues. Now, this isn't to bag on YouTube. I'm not even remotely suggesting YouTube is up to anything nefarious. Just trying to filter this information is extremely difficult. And so it's not a situation where YouTube's doing a poor job per se. Any other site that tried to do this, any other service that tried to do this would have the same problems. So now the good news is, of course, people started pointing out that this was going to have a very negative effect on information movement online. One of the areas that was pointed out that was simple that everybody could understand was memes. Okay, well, if memes typically contain content from other sources. You don't usually create a meme from scratch. You take a picture from somewhere else, or maybe text. Maybe it's a photo of a celebrity doing something stupid. And often it's not infringing content because it would qualify as a fair use mechanism or a fair use defense, which would be like parody or something of that sort, maybe criticism. But those are defenses, and they're very difficult to ascertain up front for a software filtering system. And so what the practical effect of Article 13 was going to be was that you would see Facebook and Twitter and all these groups just start blocking all memes. Very few, if any, would probably get through, because why would those companies take on that potential liability? That doesn't make any sense. And so you would see the same thing on pretty much any major platform, and you would start seeing content and free speech being curtailed. And so once it was put into those terms, some of the governments in the member states of the EU started getting uncomfortable, and you started seeing some blowback. And the last version of this that we saw was that, in fact, the parties involved in drafting Article 13 were being forced to go back and redraft it. And so they actually added language that said, they removed some of the language that applied a filter had to be used, and instead said something along the lines of, special account shall be taken of fundamental rights, the use of exceptions and limitations, as well ensuring that the burden on small businesses remains appropriate and that automated blocking of content is avoided. Well, what the hell does that mean? So we're in this bizarro situation that's very typical in the EU, where the EU is encouraging internet service providers to work with copyright owners, to come up with some type of mechanism for dealing with infringement online. And basically, they're just creating a directive, a law, if you will, that is so vague that nobody understands it. Not the copyright owners, not the people that are posting content, not the people who are creating memes, not the lawyers at Facebook. Nobody understands what any of this means. It's just a complete disaster. And so we are actually seeing a situation where it looks like the European Union directive on copyright, the proposed new directive, may fail. And if I was a betting man, I would bet that it does, because it's just a mess. It's written by people who, they're white tower academics, and really just, they shouldn't be writing these things. They should be nowhere near creating laws, because they do horrible, horrible jobs of it. Now, that's almost in some ways immaterial, because at some point here, I think in the EU, even if Article 13 fails, we will see a subsequent regulation or directive issued that will try to do the same thing, but probably in a bit clearer and more common sense approach. So ultimately, what we have in the end is we have the EU using a different approach, or at least eventually using a different approach than what we see in the USA with the DMCA. And it's going to be a conflict between these two approaches. And so who will ultimately be the winner? Well, it depends on where your target market is. If you're focusing on the US, are you going to exclude the EU? Because if you exclude all traffic to the EU, well, then the US, you really only have to worry about the DMCA, and you can take advantage of that safe harbor provision. If your primary target market is the EU, and you're really going to focus on the EU, well, then you're going to have to start thinking about, how are we going to address these situations? Because, if you're going to be held liable for copyright infringement for things that your users upload, well, for a lot of people, that means getting rid of comment sections. If you have a forum, do you close your business? There's all going to be difficult questions that people are going to have to face up to. And it's unfortunate, but that's where we are. So that's it for the DMCA versus Article 13. If you have any questions or comments, post them below. I'll be happy to answer them. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy the video, we feel shame. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to the channel for more DMCA and copyright information. And have a good one.